Jeff, can you talk about your approach to fundraising with StubHub and Spreecast? I understand that you've raised large amounts from, you haven't raised large amounts from VCs for any of your ventures. Can you talk about this?
Well, what I didn't realize at the time, I probably should have been talking to you with all the extra money you were making selling tickets on StubHub. You probably could have funded my company.
I probably could have.
So, what I did with StubHub and what I'm doing now with my current company, Spreecast, in terms of financing them, is a little different probably than many other companies, because I've tended to really focus on individual investors as long as possible, basically trying to get a larger number of investors and sort of a more diversified shareholder base, as opposed to getting sort of one venture firm to put in $10 million and own 20+% of the company. And there's pros and cons of both approaches, I think, and I think it's very relevant for this audience, because I know a lot of people are interested in angel investing and are doing angel investing, and I've found as an entrepreneur that there's some really big advantages with going the angel route for fundraising. And the advantages I found are really, number one, you don't have one big investor who has a huge amount of influence on the company and who can steer you in directions that you may not agree with or have influence over you that is in contrast with how you want to run the company. And so that's so by going with a larger number of shareholders, each who have smaller ownership percentage, you kind of maintain more flexibility as an entrepreneur to do the things that you think are best, that you think are the right thing for the business. That's number one. Number two is you generally can get better terms. I think a lot of the angel investors are less focused on some of the non-economic terms, and even from an economics perspective, I think you can sometimes get a better valuation. But particularly with the non-economic terms, things like governance and board seats and controls or negative voting controls that venture firms often look for, I think you can, if you're sort of dealing with a lot of smaller investors, you can often, as an entrepreneur, not give up those controls. And so those are really, I think, the two big advantages that I've found. And so that's with StubHub, we raised about $10 million from really individual investors. There were a couple of sort of small institutions in there that played the role really more of an angel investor, because they didn't own the typical sort of 20% ownership. They just kind of threw some money in. But we were basically cash flow positive with that 10 million. We ended up raising another 12 million after that from one venture fund at a $150 million valuation. So it was like an 8% ownership stake after that financing. But we were sort of already off to the races at that point. And then Spreecast, kind of similar thing. My current company, we're all about video, live video. So it's sort of like part Skype and part YouTube. And we're doing sort of very similar approach to financing as well.
What do you recommend to entrepreneurs you work with as an angel investor for like their Series A, Series B rounds? Like, when do you get beyond being able to raise the majority of your round from angel?
Well, actually, so as I said, like with StubHub, we did a convertible note seed round, and then a Series A, B, C round, all from essentially angel investors,
awesome.
Individual,
cool.
Wealthy individuals, and so I don't think that just because it has an A or a B in front of it, means that you need to go to the venture community. You can go to the venture community, and there are some advantages. One advantage is you can have, you don't have to deal with all these different shareholders who may have questions, and investors who want to know, updates on the company or see financials, and so it can get kind of tedious dealing with more people. It can also be a more cumbersome process to raise the capital. I mean, if you find one investor quickly in a sort of more traditional venture round, you can do it, real quickly. But to answer your question, what I usually tell the entrepreneurs that I've invested in when I was doing angel investing, which I don't do as much anymore, but was consistent with what I just said, which is if you can raise capital from individuals, there's a lot of advantages in that.
Can you talk about lessons learned as an entrepreneur when it comes to co-founding your team and building a team and finding talent?
Yeah, I've one thing that that I think is really important that is even more important today than it was when I started StubHub in 2000 is you have to have really strong technical talent as part of the founding team. We started StubHub. There were two of us that founded the company, and we were both really more business people. We had worked in the financial services industry. We had done some interesting things, but neither one of us were writing code. I have an engineering degree, but I was never writing code in my sort of day-to-day job. So I was sort of useless as a developer. And I think that in 2000 that was sort of possible. I think today it's I don't want to say impossible, but it's really challenging to start a company that's an internet-based company or a software-based company or mobile company that doesn't have key engineering talent on the founding team, somebody who has substantial ownership. And so I think finding that person, if you're not that person, is critical. And being very generous with equity is critical as far as that person's concerned. And generally speaking. And then I think another thing that I've learned just in terms of team building and hiring, kind of more generally even outside the founding team, but I think it applies to sort of matchmaking with co-founders as well, is I think really experience is overrated relative to the more kind of innate characteristics that someone may have. So things like curiosity and creativity and intelligence and work ethic are much more important than what the person's resume says and do they have the exact skills that you're looking for. And I spent a lot of time early on when I was hiring would sort of look for someone, gosh, we want this person to do A, B, and C, so we need to go find someone who's done A, B, and C in order to be able to kind of know what they're doing. And I later have more recently come to believe that it's not that important whether they've done A, B, and C before, because somebody who's smart and creative and curious and works hard can kind of figure out how to do A, B, and C and learn it, generally speaking. And it's more important to find somebody who's got those sort of right, kind of more softer, innate skills and characteristics, and someone who's a good cultural fit with the team.
How do you make up for that when you're working with someone you bring onto the team that has the right culture fit, but doesn't have the experience you're looking for, but just is really smart and will be able to figure out? How do you make up for that lack of experience? Do you introduce them to advisors and mentors? Do you?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you an example of my co-founder at Spreecast right now, who is an amazing talent and extremely smart individual. He's our CTO and he's our co-founder, and he had no computer science background. He went to Yale, studied I think political science, worked in financial services at a hedge fund and private equity and or venture capital, I think, and then a hedge fund. And when 2008 happened, his like everybody else's hedge fund, his hedge fund blew up, and he sort of said to himself, right, it's time for a career change. Taught himself how to code, and he's just got such a curiosity and a thirst for knowledge that he's just an extremely valuable person on our team right now. So, and if I had said, does he have the right experience or skills that we would need to do this, he clearly would not have. So I think that's a good example of, so he's taught himself on his own time. He's, utilized a lot of online resources, attended, events and conferences to learn, and he's just taught himself.
Awesome. What are your thoughts on the lean startup movement and the implications for startups?
Yeah, so, I think there's some great learnings in the whole notion of, put out a minimum viable product early, test and learn, and kind of iterate based on that. I think one of the shortcomings, though, that I see there is, sometimes companies take a while to sort of bake and hit an inflection point, and you may have a sort of relatively extended period of time when you put out a product that it grows, but it's maybe not necessarily an exponential growth or a hockey stick. And I think if you iterate too quickly, if you sort of if you draw the conclusion that, oh, this isn't working, so we need to iterate and do something else, you're never giving something an opportunity to bake long enough to ever become successful. So with both of my companies, we see that in the early years where not everything is an Instagram where in 18 months you've got 50 million users. It's just most companies take a while to kind of get that snowball effect going and to really grow. So I think that's one of the shortcomings I see with the lean startup movement is you're just constantly moving on to the next thing, and maybe one or more of the things that you left in the dust actually would have worked had you kind of given it a little bit more time. I see the Q&A sign. I don't know if that means we're supposed to be doing Q&A right now. Yeah. But I'm guessing that's what it means.
Good thing you caught that. I was moving on to the next question. Yeah, so let's open up to questions. Anyone have any questions? Someone has one. There we go.
So you said you started StubHub in 2000, and I believe you sold it to Ticketmaster. Is that correct?
We sold it to eBay.
Okay. So did a venture partner introduce you to eBay and facilitate that sale, or did that happen in a different way?
No, that happened in a very different way. We actually had an ongoing sort of working relationship with eBay that sort of emerged pretty early on. So I started in 2000. We sold it in 2007. By 2001, we were already doing some things with eBay. We went through a short period of time where we were actually taking some of our ticket listings and using eBay's API to post those listings on eBay. We stopped that after a little while because it wasn't working great. But even then, we started collaborating with eBay on some of the government relations issues with the ticket resale laws that existed in a bunch of states around the country. There were no federal laws, but a handful of states had, laws that regulated the resale of tickets, and some still do actually. And so we were collaborating with eBay on sort of lobbying to change the laws in those states. So we kind of had an increasing relationship. I knew, a couple of key people, got to know a couple of the key people, at eBay, who kind of the guy who ran the sort of tickets vertical, and then his boss, and then, the woman who was sort of responsible for government relations. And we kind of had a growing relationship, and they had approached us a couple of times, about buying the company, and those conversations never got real serious, and the price talk was never something we were interested in selling the company at. So, we kind of had a couple missed opportunities in the probably 2004 to 2006 timeframe, and then they got serious, and then they kind of got serious, and it was a better time for us, and and we kind of agreed on price, and then ultimately sold the company to them. They were definitely the most logical buyer.
You talk about the need to have a technical competency in the founding team. And you also mentioned that in your StubHub that both founder doesn't have that. So can you use that example to elaborate how do you find the right person? And then is it that it has to be directly somebody know you that take a personal trust in you, or it could possibly happen kind of outside your direct network?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think it's different now than it was in 2000, just because the market for engineering talent today is just much tighter, and there's so much more demand for good engineers and technical people, coming from big companies like Google and Facebook, and then also from startups, and there's 10 jobs for every good engineer out there, and so that dynamic, which it was always tough, but it's just gotten that much tougher today than it was 13 years ago. So I think that's the key difference, and so as far as the second part of your question, I don't think you need to have, you can find a co-founder that's in your network, or you can find a co-founder who's technical, who you meet through any one of a number of different ways. You could try to meet them through posting things on Craigslist. You can go to meetups and meet technical people at meetups, and you can kind of build a relationship and start to work together and see how that goes. So I don't think it has to be someone in your network. And the individual that I was telling you about just a minute ago, who's my co-founder at Spreecast, is somebody who I actually met by posting something on the Rails meetup in the San Francisco Rails meetup group. So, so yeah, and I think it can happen, anyway. Yeah.
So you raised a lot of money from angels, and it's like A, B, C from angels. What kind of approach do you take that in terms of the individuals? Like, you go to like with more like family office type structures, or you go to like more like a quantitative approach? You don't know this before you do this.
Yeah.
So how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I would say, pretty similar both at StubHub and Spreecast. We had a couple, at both companies, we had, a pretty large number of shareholders. So to your volume question, I think there's, in Spreecast, we've only done a seed round and a Series A. We probably already have 30 individual investors. And at StubHub, by the time we sold it after doing our series, our kind of convertible note, and then an A, B, C, and D round, we probably had 50 individual investors and a couple of more institutional kind of folks. But the range, the kind of check size ranged from 10 grand all the way up to $1 million. And so some people did write $1 million check, or wrote a couple checks that added up to $1 million, over a couple more than one series. And some of them are wealthy individuals that effectively have family offices, or could have family offices, kind of north of $100 million kind of net worth. But then some of them were people who were writing $10,000 checks. So it was kind of a pretty mixed bag. Both my companies kind of had that.
Great. Well, Jeff, thanks for your time. It's great chatting with you, and
Thanks,
thank you.
Chris. Great to meet you. Great to have you. Thanks a lot.